we want to talk about really off-grid prepping. Here we go. Yeah.
Wow. Hey everybody, I'm Bill.
And I'm Elizabeth. Live simple.
Live free. Off-grid prepping. What's the difference between prepping and off-grid prepping? A lot of people prep, and they prep with things that have to be resupplied. They need to buy. Off-grid prepping is when you prep in such a way that you're not relying on purchasing anything. You could do it out in the middle of the woods all by yourself if you want it. What am I talking about? So a lot of people make comments on a regular basis on our videos that it's good to have a generator for emergencies. I absolutely agree.
Oh, yes.
Thing of it is, a generator takes gasoline. And what happens when you run out of gasoline? That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Off-grid prepping doesn't rely on buying any supplies. A generator you can use when the power goes out, but you're still dependent on buying gasoline.
Right, and there's a difference between something that just lasts for a short time and possibly something that's going to last longer.
Yeah, that's great for short-term emergency situations.
Oh, yeah.
A storm knocks the power out and you're without power for 5 days or a week. That's great. If you're planning on a generator and you've got enough gas for that, go for it. You know, her sister, my sister-in-law, has a whole house generator that I guess it burns propane.
Yeah, I guess it does.
And it kicks on automatically when the power goes out, and it powers the whole house. That's great. Propane will last maybe about a week.
And that has been really good for them when they've had some kind of a storm knock things
Yep.
out or a big nor'easter.
Yep.
You don't get Wi-Fi, but you can get all of your electricity.
Yeah. But what happens when the propane runs out? So
That's more long-term.
that's what I'm talking about. Short term, that stuff is great, but we want to talk about and think about long-term strategies for long-term emergency situations. There are many different reasons that might happen long-term. I don't want to get into all the different reasons, but let's just say something more than 2 or 3 weeks, lasting up several months or even several years. Once you're set up for long-term, you can go as long as you need to, pretty much. So we want to talk about specifically off-grid prepping. So one of the first most obvious things that people talk about is solar.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we plan on putting a solar system in our camper van if I ever get the time to build it out.
We're working on everything here.
We have solar lanterns and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Solar cell phone chargers, little things I'll show you in a minute. But as far as having an entire house solar system or a large solar system that I'm going to rely on for the long term, I'm not really planning on that.
Right. That's not for us, not our long-term strategy.
Now, if you feel comfortable with that, then by all means do it. But here's the thing. I don't know if you've heard anything about the shortage right now of semiconductors, of microchips, but there's a real serious shortage of them.
And you can research that. It's there.
Yeah, and recently 2 Ford plants have had to shut down because they can't get the microchips that they need to build a car. And it takes about 3,000 of those little chips to build one car. 3,000.
Those little chips are in everything
Yep.
that's electronic.
I
at
just
all.
read an article about an hour ago that Nissan has just announced that they're cutting their production by 30% because they can't get the microchips.
Wow.
And that's their stated reason they can't get the microchips.
Wow.
And it's causing all kinds of problems, even getting parts for medical equipment, x-ray machines, all kinds of stuff. Now, why am I bringing that up? That's a whole video in itself. I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
But the point is, solar power, even though it's passive, it can still break down. You can have a problem with your solar, your charge controller and those sorts of things. Those all take microchips, and if they break down, you might not be able to get replacements for them. So if the solar is what you are relying on and that breaks down, then most of your preps are out the window.
Yeah, it's still something that requires repair pieces.
Right.
And how easily available would those be over the long haul, or how expensive, or how, solar is so wonderful. In fact, we would consider at least getting a small solar generator just to help for times when electricity goes out, or just to save electricity. But for long-term, prepping, there's things that can break.
Yeah. In fact, we don't have any kind of big solar system at all like that, but I'm considering getting some kind of solar generator once we finish all the addition
Other
and all
stuff,
that stuff.
yeah.
I think they cost anywhere from like $500 or $600 up to a couple thousand. It's just a portable unit that has a battery in it. You can set it in the sun, then you can plug in your refrigerator. That's a great idea, but I'm not going to rely on it for long term.
Right. Oh, for the whole house usage.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's look at some of the major categories that we need to think about. The first one is heat. Obviously, if the power goes out, most heating systems don't work because you either have electric heat or you have some kind of a furnace. It might burn oil or propane, but it takes electricity to run. So you have to have some other kind of heating system.
Yeah.
So our preferred alternate heating system is
the wood stove.
Yeah. Which she absolutely loves.
Yeah, I'm crazy about that thing. I love it. It's very romantic and wonderful to me, as well as being very functional.
Now, I have had quite a few people ask if our wood stove can be converted to use wood pellets.
Yeah, we get coal. We get asked that a lot.
And my response is always, why would I want to do that? I have to buy wood pellets. I have to buy coal, and it might not be available. The thing I love about a wood stove and living out here in the country like we do is that as long as I'm willing to put in the work to process the wood, I can always get wood to burn.
Yeah.
So that's our preferred method of heating. Now, go ahead.
So we also do want to acknowledge that, unfortunately, there are areas that we know of in America where you're not allowed to burn a wood stove.
Right. A lot of places in Colorado, up at altitude, you're not allowed to burn them because of the pollution that it causes, especially in the mountain valleys. It just sits there in the valleys and the smoke doesn't blow away. Yeah. I understand that.
Where we live, it's not an issue, but we acknowledge that it can be. Yeah.
Also, in big cities, you live in an apartment on the 12th floor, you're not going to be able to put in a wood stove.
Right.
And I've had people ask me about that. What do I do about heat? I live in the city. I live in a condo.
Right.
So my first thought was, well, there are freestanding kerosene heaters or like a Mr. Buddy propane heater. You can use those. Two problems with them. First of all is you still have to buy the fuel for them. You have to have stockpile enough fuel. But I was just talking to my son about this the other day, and he said, and I didn't realize that those things are listed as being safe for indoor use. But he said if you look at the fine print, it says not to be used as a primary heat source, and most of them produce 0.10% carbon monoxide, and it said that they are safe for indoor use up to 4 hours a day.
Yeah, we never knew that before.
I never knew that. That's in the fine print that nobody ever reads. But if you're going to use one of those, don't use them for more than 4 hours a day, according to the fine print.
Or just be very aware and really careful.
So, if you're in the city, I would recommend getting one of those and using it, to warm up one room at least occasionally. But if it's going to get really cold, I'll be blunt. You can survive cold. I have done a lot of winter backpacking.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of days out in the field when I was in the Army in Colorado at Fort Carson when it was 10 below. And we
16 below one time.
You can survive that kind of cold weather, especially inside of a house where you're not in the wind. As long as you're prepared for it, as long as you have the proper clothing and the proper bedding, you can survive that.
Yeah, there's like down substitute little light jackets and stuff that you can get that are very workable and movable. Bill was over the road for a while when he was driving truck, and I did an experiment over one winter because he was gone most of the time. He was only home about maybe 3 to 4 days a month, and so I'm real frugal, and I decided to see what I could do about just saving on heat since it was just me. So I don't think I ever had my heat above 55, but I had really warm, comfortable clothing and a really warm bed, and I could heat up the bathroom, for showers, stuff like that. It's amazing how comfortable I was able to stay that way. If you know that you've got good warm clothing, a good warm bed, and also we'll be talking about this, a way to be able to have something hot to drink or eat. I'm not saying people need to try to suffer through sub-zero weather all the time, but if you've got the proper stuff, it's amazing how warm you can actually stay. We've certainly done it backpacking. People live in real cold climates all the time that rely on warm clothing, and warm bedding.
I've done winter camping and backpacking, and I used to be a mountaineer, rock climbing and ice climbing, and I would go on ice climbing trips in the winter when it never got above 20 degrees at the hottest. And so, for days on end, and it's possible. You just have to have the right mindset,
Yeah.
and the right clothing.
Right.
So.
And so then, of course, that takes us to the whole thing about cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And, being able to still cook food and also to be able to get drinks, especially if you're in the cold. Warm drinks are really good at helping keeping your body temperature up. And so one of the things that we wanted to mention that I think would still work wonderfully, even if you are in a place where you can't burn wood or in an apartment building or something like that, if you have access to sunshine, there are solar ovens out there that are they really work well. In fact, we are hoping to do a review on one when you can get a breath to do it, can get a chance to do a review on a solar oven.
We have one. We just haven't done anything with it.
There just hasn't been a chance yet to try to really give it a good review. There's a lot of YouTube videos about solar ovens. But that is one way that you can use the sun and be able to actually cook things and heat things. So that is a real good thing. If you've got some way where you can have a safe place to put it, the rocket stove that we've done the video about, it really works efficiently. It only takes little bits of twigs, and you can cook, you can heat things, and that is also a really good thing to be able to possibly think about doing. And then, of course, we're planning, if I have to, go
I
ahead.
want to talk about the wood stove.
Yeah.
The rocket stove.
Yeah, go ahead, hon.
When I did that rocket stove, and I know many of you have been introduced to our channel initially through that rocket stove video, because we got, can you believe it, like 4.5 million views on that thing?
Yeah, that's
it's mind-boggling.
One of our big viral ones.
But anyway, I initially said in that video that you can even do that if you live in a city on a balcony of a high-rise apartment building. And I got so much ridicule from that, and people saying you're going to have the fire department down there and all kinds of stuff. I had to take out that section. Here's what I meant. If you live in an apartment complex and you've got a balcony that's all concrete, and many of them are, then, and if you can use it out away from the building, out near the railing of a concrete balcony, you can do that. It's not a big fire. It's just this tiny little thing. And if you had a bucket of water, you could put it out in just one splash.
Yeah.
That can be done. And once it's burning, it doesn't put off any smoke. And as far as the fire department coming, what we're talking about is a real true emergency breakdown of society where there probably won't be a fire department.
Well, yeah,
So-
where it's that would not be attracting a bunch of attention from a fire department.
Of course,
Yeah.
you always have to be cautious and use
Yes.
common sense. But if you
give it a good foundation with the bricks and
right.
stuff.
But
yeah.
if you live in a balcony that's made out of steel and concrete, you can probably do it there safely.
Yeah, I mean, goodness, think about, how, I mean, our wood stove, we have fire protection under it, fire protection beside it. You just have to think about being safe.
Right.
But there would be, we're trying to think of ideas that can help if someone is in a situation that's not necessarily out in the country or rural. And that the rocket stove, I mean, it can burn just little bits of things, and do a good job.
So then, as far as cooking, we have the wood stove that we use for heat. our wood stove has a flat top, and it's also perfect for cooking on.
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of intended to have a top that can be cooked on.
Right.
And
Now, if you're gonna
I love that. Love it.
if you're going to use a wood stove for heat and for cooking, you need to make sure that you have a way to process the wood that doesn't use gasoline. If you usually use a gas chainsaw and a gas-powered wood splitter, what happens when you can't get the gasoline anymore? It's really cool. It's a cross-cut saw, one of those great big long things with a handle on each end, and it takes two people to use it to be able to cut up the wood. It's either that or an axe, and I'd rather use this big saw than an axe.
Well, the saw does more efficient. Just a nice clean cut.
Right. And also, I have a wood splitter that you see here is very easy to use, and it's much more efficient and safer than using an axe. And I've just gotten this one recently, and I really like it. I also have a manual hydraulic log splitter that works pretty well too. It's easier, less energy it takes to use it, but it's much slower, but it does work.
Right. To get the big pieces of wood down. Now, one of the things that's involved in all of this that we really want people to be aware of, because we've lived in a world in most of our society here where you pretty much have everything you need just available to go buy. But if you're going to ever think about trying to, use a wood stove, then start learning about wood stoves. In other words, if you live near some woods, there's dead wood out there. You can't burn green wood.
Right.
And so you have to learn to look for dead wood and give things a chance to season. There's no reason to just go chop the whole forest down, and it's not going to be usable anyway.
Green wood is very, very hard to keep burning
Yes.
in a wood stove, and if you do keep it burning, it puts so much creosote up inside the chimney that it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
So the wood
yes.
needs to season for basically at least a year after it's chopped, after it's cut down, before you can burn it.
And we've had a lot of people say, well, why aren't you using hardwoods? Well, the only thing we burn is hardwoods. Now, out west, a lot of times the only thing people can find is pine. Just be aware it puts out a lot more creosote. But, it can be burned. We just have basic hardwoods here because we're in the east. But, just learn how to make sure that you're keeping your chimney safe. Your smokestack, whatever, safe. And, it's better to kind of learn about stuff like this early on than when it becomes an absolute necessity.
Right.
And so we have a lot of woods around with a lot of dead wood. I don't feel like we're going to have to decimate the woods. That's not the point at all. There's always a lot of dead wood out there. So but learn how to deal with it. Also, just to let you know, one of the things, since we're talking about this, that I made a point of getting is I've got I should just we'll show you a picture of it. I've got a big cast iron heavy duty kettle. And it's all enameled, so it's easy for me to keep clean. But I've got that so that I can keep some humidity going when I've got the wood stove going. But it's also something that I could cook in and heat water in and stuff. It's going to be very sturdy and able to handle long-term exposure to pretty high heat. And I just love that thing, and I think it's been a very good investment.
And of course, on the wood stove, if you're cooking on it, basically you can use any pot on there. But we really like using the cast iron
Yes, we
on the wood stove.
Highly recommend cast iron. It's easy to take care of and keep clean. It'll also handle really well working on a rocket stove, or if you have to like cook with some kind of a wood fire.
Mm.
So yeah. Okay, so how do you keep some light when it gets dark?
Well, if you have a solar generator, then you can just plug in your lamps.
Right.
But
right. That's
like
right.
I said, what happens if it burns out or for some reason it doesn't work? That's not our long-term plan.
Right.
So we have several different methods. First of all, like I said, we're not against solar.
No, not at all. It's very useful.
We have a bunch of these little solar lanterns.
And these actually...
This is a flashlight like this, where you open it up and it becomes a lantern.
And these actually charge very nicely with the sun.
Yeah, there's a little solar charger right there. This is a different one. This one I think is called a Lucy light.
I love the Lucy lights.
This one actually blows up, opens up into
You inflate it.
Yeah, you inflate it. There's a solar panel here. The lights are on the bottom. That works well. We have, I think, 3 or 4 of these, and also 3 or 4 of the Lucy lights.
Right.
So we have enough for a couple in every room. And these, most of the time, will only last maybe 4 or 5 hours, but they'll charge up the next day. If you got a bunch of them, then you can rotate them, and it works fine. What?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say in terms of lighting is that, and we'll be talking more about this, but this is like, we're very glad to be able to use these, but we also know that these could eventually wear out too.
Right.
So we'll be talking more about that.
Right.
Go ahead.
So
Helen.
we've also got, I think you can see them up there.
There's at least 3 behind
We've
us.
got three oil lanterns.
And they're sturdy glass. They got good wicks in them.
And
Yeah.
we have a gallon of lamp oil will last a long time.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing, eventually you're going to run out, but if you have several gallons, it'll probably last you several years, especially if you're using it in conjunction with solar and with candles and that sort of thing.
And the thing is, we also have a lot of candles, so if we run out of oil, we do eventually have candles. And I'll just say this, if we would ever get to the point where all of the solar would break down and we didn't have any more oil for our lanterns and we ran out of candles, I don't really know how to make candles, nor do I have the resources for that. But you know what? We'd have a fire going, and you know what? We could live with just a nice, kind of a quiet, dark place. You learn to kind of go to sleep when it's dark and be awake when it's light.
Like I said, I've done a lot of camping, backpacking, and a lot of winter backpacking. And in winter, it gets dark at about 4:30 or 5.
Yeah.
And you learn when you're doing that, when it gets dark, you go to bed.
Yeah.
You sit around the fire and then you go to bed. Well, we can sit around the fire and then go to bed.
Right. So, if all else fails, the sun will come up and I will have light the next day.
Because what we're talking about here is survival.
Yeah.
Not having all of the
bells and whistles that we're used to. So anyway, we are glad to have the solar lighting and very glad to have the lanterns. They do a beautiful job.
Yeah.
That's a very good old-fashioned solution. And of course, they have candles around. Yep. Okay, that was for lighting.
So then, we have a lot of kitchen appliances. Now, a lot of kitchen appliances take electricity. And if you have a little solar generator, then maybe you can use it for that. But we're talking about using things that are more old school.
Definitely old school. Let me show you just a couple of old school things I have. For one thing, I'm just going to mention this now. Due to my sister coming up with this, it was beautiful. She fixed up for me. But anyway, I have a pedal sewing machine. And I love that. And I've learned how to use it and how to keep it going. It's very sturdy. But in an emergency, if I really need to mend something or I want to make something, I can actually do it like the old-fashioned way without electricity.
Yeah, so you sit there and your feet go on the pedals and makes
the needle goes up and down. It's pretty cool. I have a video out about it. It's not hard to find. One of the things I'm going to show you here, I have arthritis in my hands, and doing a can opener where you click it on and it goes eat, eat, eat like that, especially on some of our bigger, heavier cans, is really hard for me. I love this thing. This is a big old heavy-duty can opener. It works so well and just cranks really smoothly. I can open anything with this. And I love this thing, and it's very sturdy and well built. So that's something I really appreciate having.
If you're going to ask us where to get that, you just have to search online for stuff like that.
Yeah, which is what we did.
A lot of these things we bought over the years, and we don't even really know exactly where we got them.
Yeah, but
most of them were online, Amazon, or do a search on Google or something.
Right, or you can sometimes be in a kitchen store and come across something and go, ooh, like I love this. Okay, you know what this is? It's an egg beater. I can whip up. I can make whipped cream if I wanted to out of this, or meringue if I want to really burn the energy, to do it. But I can mix things with this, and it's very sturdy, real basic. Nothing too fancy with it, but and for me, for my hands, I do better with this than I do with something I hold this way. But get whatever kind you want. But I mean I love that thing.
When I was growing up, I think my mother had an electric mixer like that, but she also had a crank one, and I remember her using the crank one more than the electric one.
I remember my mom using the crank more than the electric.
But you hardly
too.
ever see these anymore.
I was thrilled to find it, but I think that's really cool. I love tea. And I know that I could eventually run out of tea bags, but I grow tons prolific. I have a prolific amount of mint growing outside. In fact, I have to kind of hold it back all the time, and I do. I keep it under control, but I pick that mint and dry it, and I have jars with just the dried mint in it. And I love this thing. This was a gift from a really dear friend. It's just a little basket. It's all full of tiny little holes with a little lid on top. Just pop that in, put in my mint or whatever tea, and then put hot water with it. And I can make a really lovely tea with this, and it's just easy to clean right back out again. So anyway, I like that, and it's neat. we have a percolator
For coffee.
for coffee.
How do you make coffee without an electric coffee maker?
Right. So years ago, I bought a real percolator that goes bloop 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 at the top and everything. They're really neat. And with all of our kitchen stuff going on right now, I can't get my hands on it real fast, but it's around. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that. I do have a French press here. These are very inexpensive. It makes lovely, fancy coffees and stuff. But you just put the coffee in there and let it get good and brewed, and then just push this down, and you end up with beautiful coffee here with all the grounds on the bottom. My main thing with this is that this would be more for me, because when Bill makes coffee, he makes it in much larger amounts. So, and I do have a percolator for
And
him.
it's very possible to make coffee in an electric coffee maker without electricity. All you do is just lift the lid, you boil your water on your wood stove, and you pour it into the basket where the coffee is with the filter, and it just runs right through. The only difference with the electric is it heats the water for you.
Right.
But if you heat it, you just pour it in, you can still make a full pot of coffee that way.
Well, and the thing of it is, it's easy to have quite a few filters around. We get them very inexpensively, and we're really in good shape for filters.
Mm-hmm.
But I like knowing that if we need to, and we ever don't have filters, and of course we try to really stock coffee, but we can use things that don't even have to have the paper filter.
I could probably use this too. Just put coffee grounds in here and then drop that into the mug and let it steep.
That
and
would
just lift it up and take the coffee out.
Yeah, that's a very useful thing there. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, she sent that to me with just some wonderful loose leaf tea. So just little ideas like that, things where you don't have to have electricity to still do things like coffee, and different. I really enjoy tea. I enjoy herb tea a lot. Things that you might want to make. People did it without electricity for years and years. And I want to bring up something just very quickly here that I just, I thought about this in our last video, and I think it's really a good idea to keep in mind. What are we doing to keep ourselves safe? What are we doing to keep healthy? And what are we doing to keep sane? And for a lot of people, if they had to go without coffee in the morning, it would be very hard on them. So it's just nice to have ideas.
Of course, that means you have to have a store of coffee in order to do that.
Right.
But then you got all this coffee, you still got to have a way to make it.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now, the three most important things if someone is going to end up in like maybe a sudden emergency situation is shelter and water and food. And so we've talked about shelter.
Shelter first, because if you live in a cold climate, you're not going to survive the winter or survive the night if you don't have shelter.
If you don't have some way to keep warm.
And then water, because water you can only last 3 or 4 days without it.
Yeah.
And then food, because you can last several weeks without food. So that's the priority. Warm shelter, and then water, and then food.
Right. And of course, if something happens in a nice middle of the spring, that's a different ball game, but you want to think about it. Can I be sheltered if the weather's cold when something happens? So water. Water is a biggie. Water's very important. We were set up great up in the tiny house because
In Pennsylvania, before we moved to Virginia.
Yeah, because we had well, in the West you'd call it a river. Out here it's a creek. But we had a really nice creek, maybe half a mile away.
Mm-hmm. That ran year round, and there was a rapids area that didn't freeze in the winter.
Yeah.
And I have a bicycle trailer that would allow me to haul 2 5-gallon buckets full of water. And I would ride down there, like it says, less than half a mile, fill up the 10 gallons of water, bring it back, and then we have a Berkey water filter. So we could
big one.
Yeah. So we could either pour it into the filter to get drinking water, or we could pour it into the toilet tank to flush the
Right.
toilet.
Right.
And it worked really well.
But
Now here
it's a little different.
there's no water right around our property. There is a fairly large river
I think it's a big river.
about probably 3 or 4 miles away. I can still use the bicycle to go get water, but it's more of a production because it's further away.
Yeah.
So that would still be the plan in a real emergency. But what we're talking about getting, and we don't have anything like this yet, but we hope to get it,
We're
is
working on
some
it.
kind of a water catchment system to have tanks that would catch the water off of the roof. Now that's not legal in all places. It's completely illegal to capture rainwater and store rainwater in the entire state of Colorado.
Anyway,
Which
yeah.
is, we won't go into that, but you have to check with local laws. But
Yes.
in most places you can catch rainwater You can get, big 300-gallon FDA approved water tanks, plastic water tanks to do that. I want to do that and run it, catch it off of our shed roof, and in the summer when we don't need an emergency, we can use it to water the garden. So I'm not running the pump, pulling water out of the well to water the garden. But then in emergencies, we can run that water through our Berkey filter and drink it.
Right. Yeah, having water is important. We're
So-
trying to figure out ways to be able, somebody came up with a great idea recently. If you're a canner, fill all of your unused cans, your jars. They're not cans, they're jars. I don't know why they call it canning and not jarring, but anyway, fill your canning jars with water before you use them and after you use them.
Now you're not going to be able to have long-term water storage like that, but you might have a week or 2 weeks worth of water storage
Right.
there.
It's just one more way you can have some
Right.
water around. It
Right.
never hurts just to have some water stored.
And speaking of water storage, a lot of people ask about, what kind of containers do you use and do you treat it and all that kind of stuff. Water storage is great, once again, for the short term,
Right.
for a couple weeks even. But for long term, you're going to have some actual source of water that you can rely on.
Right. Yeah.
So,
when we think about food, one of the things that we really try to keep in mind is that if we think about, what can we do to make sure there will be food around, what happens without electricity? See, I feel like that in a lot of ways, electricity is the biggest fragile point. We are
Absolutely.
so reliant on it, and there's so many things that can take out electricity. And so then, what do you do with food that you've got in the freezer or things like that? We don't want to be relying on our long-term storage being frozen food. I like having food in the freezer, but I don't want to be like losing so many resources if I lose my electricity.
Right.
And then once again, you can keep that going with a generator, but eventually, what are you doing, to be able to have food?
So obviously we use our refrigerator, we use our freezer,
Of course.
but we don't use it for any of our long-term storage.
Yeah.
We'll buy some meats at the grocery store and throw it in the freezer until we're ready to use it. But we don't plan on it. Let me say this again: we don't plan on it for any of our long-term storage, because you could have hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars worth of meat or other foods spoil if the power goes out.
And goodness, that could be a big bad storm that knocks things out for a couple of weeks, let alone any long-term issues.
Yeah.
Things can get to where, let's say somebody is just struggling and can't even pay the electricity. It's just nice to know.
Right.
That
Let me mention here too, somebody suggested getting a propane refrigerator or freezer. Those are great. They work great. I've stayed at a cabin in the woods before that didn't have any electricity, that had a propane refrigerator. It worked great. But once again, you have to plan on storing the propane in order to do that. I was going to mention this too when we were talking about cooking.
Oh yeah.
We have an electric stove right now in the kitchen.
Yeah.
We're planning on replacing it with a gas propane stove. Now, I have to buy the propane, but if I'm using just the stove, I can actually buy enough propane to last our stove more than a year. And so if you get a couple of extra propane tanks and store them, you could have enough for your gas refrigerator and your gas stove to last you for a year or more, and then you would go from there.
Right.
But I still don't necessarily want to plan on it for long-term storage.
Rely on it for long-term storage. One of the main reasons we're putting in the stove is because I just really love cooking on gas compared to electric. We've had a good stove, but I love
it's
gas.
absolutely perfect for short-term outages, because we
Yes.
can always just cook on the stove, no big
Yeah,
deal.
you still got your stove. Yep.
Yeah. So, now, we're talking about, for long-term food storage, we don't want to talk a lot about this because we've covered that before, but canned goods, freeze-dried goods, dried goods, basically is the things that you're looking at, and things that you can on your own, whether you're a gardener or whatever, and you can things on your own.
Right. It's really important, just in terms of like being prepared, like ahead, just like learning about dry wood. Eat what you store and store what you eat, as much as you can. In other words, make sure that if you're going to be storing something, that you have at least some idea of how to cook with it and what to do with it.
Right. And a controversial topic maybe if you're a hunter or you would like to learn how to hunt.
We wanted you to know that if you don't like hunting or whatever, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Some people do want to consider hunting.
So if you're going to do that, you need to learn how, if you
Yes.
haven't already. One of the things that I like for hunting is a crossbow. I don't think it's as dangerous because the arrow won't go as far, and you can, most of the time, unless they're broken or lost, you can reuse the arrow. Also, it's silent, so you're not
You're
drawing
not bothering people.
you're not overdrawing attention to
Right,
yourself.
right.
But then even once if you take down a deer, you need to know what to do with it.
It's really important because you don't want to waste anything.
You need to know how to butcher it yourself, and then I wouldn't put it in the freezer, can it.
I tell you what, pressure canning meat is just so delicious.
I've heard a lot of people say they don't like venison because it's gamey. Not when you can it, it's not.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, soft, tender.
And see, this is going to involve learning how to hunt responsibly, do a good job with it, have some way to be able to do that, know how to process that meat properly, and then, don't wait till the last minute to learn how to can. You can't water can meat. You need to pressure can it. So you have to have something that is a pressure canner. And you end up with wonderful, very tender meat in a wonderful broth. And it'll last really well. But, if you're considering that at all, and go hunting with somebody that knows what they're doing, learn how to process the meat so that you don't waste it. And try doing some canning now. Get your jars. Be sure you have plenty of the little lids, because you can reuse the jars and the screw caps, but you can't reuse the little lids.
Right.
So, I found out that canning was just not as big of a bugaboo as I was afraid it was going to be, but I would sure hate to be trying to deal with that when I'm in an emergency situation.
Right.
So just like with a lot of things, give yourself a chance to learn ahead while things are calm.
But even you mentioned when we were talking about this before that you can can on a wood stove.
Oh yeah,
So-
but I have to have, there's water bath canning, which you can use for a lot of things, but there's things you have to pressure can to make it safe. So even if I would do it on the wood stove, I have to have a pressure canner that I know how to use. And so it can be done, but it's a wonderful way to preserve things, because it may not last like, some of the stuff that we have will last like 25 years in the can. That's how long the Thrive Life lasts. But a jar of something that's been canned properly. I just used one that was at least a year ago, and it was absolutely wonderful. It'll last quite a while.
Yeah.
So
there you have it. There's our list.
yeah, we tried to really think through.
There's our perspective on off-grid prepping. The ability to prep for any emergency without relying on buying any kind of fuel or any kind of supplies.
Yeah.
So it might be a little bit of a different perspective from what you've heard before, because a lot of preppers plan on using propane, plan on using gasoline for generators and that sort of thing.
Right. Plan on using a lot of solar.
Yeah.
Or wind generation.
Yeah. All of that technical stuff, that technological stuff that has the ability to break down that we don't like. So.
Well, and the thing of it is that you get this feeling like, oh man, solar's just like it'll be my solution forever. But do a little research. There's no such thing as just putting up a solar panel and then you just plug into it and you got electricity. There's all sorts of stuff that has to convert and adjust and change and fix, and it all has to work properly to turn into something that you can use actually as electricity. And yes, the stuff, it saves people a lot on electricity, but everything is little parts that you might not be able to find. The supply line might be broken down. I don't know,
And I follow a lot of full-time RVers, and they all have solar. Like I said, we're going to put solar in our camper. But I've seen many videos where they're having to replace batteries or having to replace the solar control unit.
Yes. Yes.
So we don't want to find ourselves relying on that and then can't get the parts.
Well, and you can have times in your own home where it's just cloudy for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So
especially here in the East.
yeah. So our attitude with all of it has been, people did this for years and years without having to rely on electricity or technology. But, the time may come in a situation where there just isn't going to be technology. So are you okay?
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say.
So there's our take on off-grid prepping. I hope you have found something here that might be useful or might help you to think in a little bit of a different way from what you've been planning so far.
Right. Just some different ideas.
So I hope that's
Yeah.
been helpful.
And there's people out there that are probably doing what we're doing a whole lot better than we are.
That's true too.
You know, that's for sure. So, all right.
So thanks for watching.
Live simple.
Live free. You be blessed.
Yes, you guys, we love you, and we just want everybody to be as safe and happy as they can.
All right.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. 10 gallons of water delivered right to my door. Fast and easy. This works. I like it.